You probably remember the TLC show 19 Kids and Counting. It, along with the off-camera family drama, was like the train wreck we just couldn't stop clicking on. And most recently, Jinger Duggar published a book about disentangling her cultish upbringing with her Christian faith. Now, even if you can't relate to the Duggars' extreme situation, it's not that uncommon to have some flavor of harmful religious experience. My next guest is a licensed mental health counselor who specializes in helping people wade through the murky waters of well-meaning ministers and covert narcissists. And today, we're going to be talking about it, so hold on to your butts. Advocate for anti-oppressive spirituality, minister's wife, Christianish, Catherine Queering. Thanks for being here.
So great to be here, Meredith. Thanks for having me.
I feel like we should kind of state up front for those that are listening that this conversation will include tangible tips, takeaways, different healing suggestions, that we're not just here to rile people up or trigger them. So you have a very interesting specialty, obviously. And at first glance, it seems so niche. Like, oh my gosh, that's so specific. How does she have a whole practice all about that? And then upon second glance, you kind of realize, wait a minute, this is actually a large portion of the population. So for the purpose of those listening to be able to relate to what we're saying, because they might not even be aware that some of the dysfunction that they're feeling could be stemming from little bits of experiences that have happened in religious settings. Can you kind of give us examples of harmful experiences that you've come across in your practice?
Absolutely. So there are some that pertain to how we feel about ourselves and our identities, such as being taught that we are utterly sinful, we can't trust ourselves, there is no way that we could do good unless we are controlled and held accountable, that anything that we feel, any of our own desires, our own leadings would lead us astray. Right? This very fundamental sense of you are bad, evil at your core, and you can't trust yourself. And you better watch yourself or you're going to be led astray. So that's one piece that's both doctrinal and the way that it's set up in communities, especially if there's high control around it or a lot of shame and guilt around it or shaming and marginalization around it, then that can lead to a lot of pain and shame. Then there's also the ways that I call covert narcissistic kind of power and control tactics show up in religious settings. And for me, that feels easier than saying anything like cult-like, which is a term other people use about high control religious settings. For me, it feels like the intent is often really good, right? People that go to church generally are there because they want to do right. They want to be in community. They want to love God. They want to love other people. And the ways that we are taught to do that in certain religious settings can actually be pretty harmful. So there's a lot of tactics wrapped up in that are like fear mongering, like trying to convince you to change or do something that they say is right out of fear. So a lot of hell doctrine, a lot of the come down and get saved this moment, don't think about it, right? Like your salvation is on the line. And a lot of the emphasis on witnessing to others is based on fear, right? This Jonathan Edwards style, just like judgment at any moment. God is so like waiting to torment you. He doesn't want to, but he's waiting to torment you if you don't comply, right? If you don't do this just right thing to be right with God or to get into heaven. And that can also lead to codependent pressure to relate to God, where instead of the healthy way of relating to other people, even authority figures, is to have your own sense of self and to feel connected. And with a codependent relationship, you feel pressure to always emotionally caretake the other person, always make sure they're okay, make sure that you're really close. And there's so much teaching, especially in evangelical settings, about guess what? If you don't feel God, you did something wrong, you must have sinned, you better fix it. You better pray harder, you better do more devotions, you better do all these things to make sure that God is okay with you and you sin. So there's a lot of like inner checking. It can lead to OCD patterns. of introspection and watching to make sure you don't step out of line and that God won't either be so upset with you that you'll be like eternally tormented, or that even you'll just lose that connection, right? And be like, oh no, I'm out of God's will. Oh no, I'm not doing the right thing. There's so much even like micromanaging of everyday things. I remember, like you're supposed to ask God what color outfit to wear or like what to wear that day because it might matter in the grand like cosmic scheme of things. And that level of watching and checking yourself and having an authority figure that does that actually sets that conception of God up to be like a narcissist, where you have to be worshipful all the time and have this feeling of gratitude while at the same time you're being controlled. And you are supposed to feel shame or conviction if you step out of that, right? Where there's no sense of your own critical thinking. There's no sense of being able to explore and learn things and make mistakes. There's a lot of having to double down on your feelings, right? And then, or double down on the beliefs, and then also be ready to explain it to other people. And there's no sense of willingness to listen, right? Like I was never taught to listen. You're only taught to explain why you're right and why that person needs the news you have. And so that also disrupts your peer relationships and your ability to grow and relate to other people where they're actually people and not projects. And also where you can know that you are human just like anyone else instead of a white savior, right? It really breeds this white savior mentality, which is not helpful for anyone, the people that are living it and all the pressure around it and the fear around it. And then the people receiving it, it feels like such disrespect and pressure and pushing and guilt. There was one more piece I was going to mention and I forget right now, but I'll mention it later.
Okay.
I remember.
Well, shit, Catherine. Were you like at my church? What the hell?
Yeah,
I feel like you were there at the community I was in, also in my head, because there were so many positive things that I personally got from that experience. But as time went on, and some of it was my own personality. Like I am a little literal, like OCD-ish. And so, yeah, I didn't make any friends because I was like, well, then they have to be projects, basically. So I didn't have many friendships growing up, which wasn't terrible because I am an introvert. I do enjoy my own company quite a lot. But yeah, I think I could have walked through that part of my life in a different way. Okay, well, I think everyone is on board now. I think we all understand. As you were explaining these different things, you used first person language. You said I a couple of times. What's your story with all of this?
Yeah, so I grew up in a large Southern Baptist church and I felt really connected to God, like through my own spirit, I think. And then reached the age where we had an evangelist that was like specialized in evangelising to children come to the church and gave this message that was fear mongering in retrospect when I was 7 and was basically like, you can't know God. You're sinful at your core. You have to pray this prayer in order to know God. And I remember the shock that now I realize was trauma. Like anytime there's that shock and disconnection and cognitive dissonance, and I was like, oh, well, I better pray that prayer. And so I did. And my family celebrated that, right? That became this celebrated moment in my life and in my community that actually distanced me from myself and disconnected me from myself. I remember after that very clearly watching myself and having them feeling like I had to manage myself to make sure I didn't hurt anyone unintentionally. Like I had really good intentions, but there were a few times when I'd say something just because I was a kid and my mom would be like, don't say that. It might hurt someone's feelings. Or being aware of like a crumpled look on my mom's face, being like, oh no, I did something, right? That everything was my responsibility to make sure everyone was okay. And I had so much like weight and guilt around the Good Samaritan story. And that's partially my personality, but it felt like an albatross around my neck. Like it kind of like you were saying about not making friends. I was like, I can't see anyone in need. I can't see anyone in need because I can't handle giving to anyone else. Right. But I wasn't allowed to listen to myself or set boundaries for myself around that. So I just had so many codependent relationships, like all the outsiders that I wanted to take in and care for, they were just like attached to me like this. And I felt so drained. And so that was one of the ways it showed up for me. I used to call it sidestepping myself as far as how it felt inside, that I wasn't able to live in my core and I wasn't able to listen to myself anymore. And there was, spacing out, dissociation from that, and then later anxiety and chronic illness, all this stuff that I've now been able to link to that. But that was kind of the beginning of my story.
I mean, it's sticky because faith is very holistic, like it's the whole person. And so when that's healthy, it's woohoo, it's awesome. But when it takes on an unhealthy, harmful, and even destructive tone, it's a lot to undo. And I think, people listening to this who are interested in deconstructing, disentangling, whatever word that they use to approach this, it can be a very scary thing because it might threaten very important relationships to them. Friendships, parental relationships, sibling relationships, and that could just send them into overwhelm and shut down. Where should people start if they are, wanting to heal from all this?
Well, first, I'm going to add another word to your Ds, the
Oh, okay.
disentangling, deconstruction, and there's also deconversion. And I think sometimes people think if they start the process of disentangling or deconstruction, that means they have to deconvert, and it doesn't.
Okay, because I was going to ask about that. I think in a lot of communities, Christian and others, there's like a doubt auto shutoff valve, right? And there's a word for it. I'm sure you know it. I don't remember it, but it's where any question against how something is done or how something is communicated is immediately shut down because doubt is, the plague, basically. And so that's like a barrier, but it's also connected, I think, to this idea that we are automatically like unconverted from whatever our faith is when maybe we're not thinking that's what our desired outcome is,
So I think that in itself tells you part of the problem with this type of religion and the way it's showing up in these settings, that there is no space for someone to ask questions without, and they may not want to leave. They may not want to be on the margins or be pushed out, but the people in the middle don't know how to tolerate it. So they keep shaming and marginalizing, and at some point say, you're in or you're out. You're with us or you're against us. But the actual high control of the community and the fear of the community is what's doing that. And so that person may be outside of that community, and that's really painful. You might feel freer and more authentic, but you've lost these connections that don't know how to connect across lines of exploration and authenticity, right? They only know how to do that if you're believing in God this one way that they know is safe.
Yeah.
And that's hard. For me, I started even in a very conservative college. I went to Wheaton College and I loved it there. And I remember people asking, like, do the rules bother you? And I was like, no. Because the colleges that I knew of were like women had to wear skirts and there were so many more rules. And this felt so free to me. It was like, no problem. There were so many denominations and so much more exploration of what it meant to be a Christian and who God was. That started my kind of a spiritual expansion, or exploration is what I like to call it. Instead of just deconstruction, we are going to expansion. And that feels full and filling, that the idea is not to be left with nothing, but to shift and flow and replace, to release what's not serving you and to be able to reclaim what you weren't able to have before, or what you need, both for yourself and your own identity and for spirituality. So for me, it just started with, I can conceptualize God as a shepherd instead of a judge. And that felt really comforting and really supportive. And then my internal voices of what I call now inner critics, but before I just called them the accuser. And I think the shepherd at that point was like, well, anything from the accuser must be from the devil, who I don't believe in anymore, but that's okay if you do. That was my conception at the time. And I was like, well, I don't have to pay attention to that. So I just let all that go. It was like, I'm only listening to things that are filled with compassion. And so that was kind of my next step. And then the learning about codependency and breaking that down. And so all my emotions are okay. God can handle that. And so it's just kind of these little iterations for me of letting more and more go, and then moving to the scripture doesn't have to be my authority. It doesn't have to be read literally. Like, that was really freeing. because there's so much suspicion and fear around that. And lately, my movement, after I've released all of the messages that were so hurtful to me, one of them was in the world, but not of it. That one was just like crushing, is that I've had space to reconnect to the divine after connecting securely to myself. So that was my goal first, after being dissociated from myself and abandoning myself in some sense, to be okay in this community and be okay with God. I was able to reconnect with myself and have a secure attachment with myself. And then there was space to reconnect with the divine. And for me, that was divine feminine. That was Mother Earth. And that's where I found the most nourishment and nurturing for myself. Right. But that was like quite a progression
Yeah. How many
of
years was that?
various, 20?
Oh, is that all? Okay. Well, because you are so articulate in the way that you explain it. And I think that in a lot of communities, and for just a lot of people with personalities, maybe similar to yours and mine, personal development is akin to achievement, right? And so when we are not developing personally and checking some kind of proverbial like box, we are not just not achieving, we're failing. And so I just say that because I don't want anyone to listen to your beautiful, well put together 5-minute story and go, I can't do that. I can't do that, you know? So if somebody's not even at the level where, I love what you said about expanding, but let's say they're not even at that level where they can go expanding. I can't even, I can't even begin to think those thoughts because I've trained myself not to, right? Is there if expanding is step 1, what's step like -3?
I think the first step would be, or a possibility of a step would be, can I pay attention to how I feel and accept that as a clue instead of a judgment? So all good psychology says that basically, and that is the essence of what's called interoception, which is the same kind of internal awareness that you have to learn as a toddler to know if you're hungry, to learn how to use the body, like all of these basic things that we say, yeah, of course we have to pay attention to our bodies about. But then emotions get labeled with morality, and emotions are actually there to help us process situations, just like our organs are. Just like our stomach helps us process food, our emotions are there to help us process experiences. And would it be okay to notice that with curiosity instead of judgment? And even notice if I'm feeling some judgment. And could I just be mindful about that instead of having to jump in quite so quickly to judge myself about that? And then if there's space later to say, is that feeling okay? Is that telling me something about my environment or that interaction? Because that's where you start being able to see maybe it's the environment that's causing this instead of me being a failure or me just not being able to manage my emotions or tough through it or have enough willpower, right? That can only get you so far. So that's one avenue. I think for me, just pursuing is there space for curiosity and the kindness of God? Is there space to actually if the scripture is your place for truth, go with that. That was my first place, is to have this sense of, oh, this is who God is. This is how God relates to us, and being able to receive that and let go of some of these conceptions of God that weren't true. I remember also realizing that some of the particular ways that religion and ways to connect with God were given to me, I realized developmentally were so arbitrary, right? This is the way to please my parents. This is the way to please this particular community. But there are other communities doing differently and other Christian parents doing it differently, right? So what if I think maybe that's a possibility? Could I explore what are all the Christian possibilities out there, even within evangelicalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I always forget how to say her first name, the one from the Duggar family that you mentioned at the beginning.
Ginger. Mm-hmm.
Ginger, yes, thank you, that she did, right? Because she ended up in an evangelical church that's probably similar to where I started, right? But it's so much better than where she was. It's so much freer and more loving. And just be able to say, what would that be like?
I like that. Okay, expansion, curiosity, interoception. How is that different than introspection?
So introspection, and I need to research this some more. I'm kind of at the beginning of this, but I'm thinking that these kind of environments that have the puritanical kind of and pietistic emphasis on your own inner world lead to a lot of introspection, especially for people who are introverts or empaths or already very aware of their internal worlds. There's a lot of, let me get to the root and dig it out. Let me cut off this part of me that is keeping me from loving God the way I need to. And that's pretty brutal when you stop and think about it, right? And a lot of introspection can lead to that, where we just get kind of stuck. And this is why people don't like to focus on themselves, because they think this is right. This is the only way to do it, is just to dig inside and be aware of all my feelings and sit in my feelings and try to get to the root and change it, instead of being like, interoception is listening mindfully and curiously to all of the feelings inside. So I'm feeling anxiety. Can I just notice that something about the situation or something about my situation is bringing up anxiety? I'm feeling a twisting in my gut. Can I just notice that? And then those parts of your body are going to give you information about what they're holding. There's a lot more neuroscience and psychology now focused on somatics in the body and how our nerves and everything tell us what's happening for us.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the opening and awareness of like just mindfulness, right? Just, can I be aware of that? Because that part of my body is holding something for me and it's trying to let me know that.
Yeah, it's like our bodies have a language and we never learned how to understand that language, which is, it's a shame really, because I think about how valuable it is to know how to exist in your body. And our bodies and our spirits, like they want to connect with us, like the part of us that is rational and thinking and decision making. And yeah, we would all be so much better for it. I wanted to ask you about something that I think happens when you're really doing the hard work of personal healing, and that's the playback. That's when you, outside of interoception and introspection, is just looking back at past conversations, past situations, and realizing how manipulative they were, because it makes you feel real dumb. And you just feel, what I call V8 moment. Like, how did I not see that? How did I allow that to happen? I could have set myself up as an adult so much better had I not, all the regrets that go along with the playback and how hard that can be. And, it's what you said, part of that, the application of doctrine in a manipulative framework, right? That kind of gives us the habits that we have as an adult. And yeah, I'm just curious if you have any insight on how to shake that loose, because as a person's walking through this, say they're past step -3, say they're on step whatever 2. There's not steps, everyone. I'm just kidding. Don't literally think there's steps. You don't graduate from this program, okay? But you know what I mean, Catherine. Do you have any helpful insights for people that are struggling with that, because you think you're, 4 steps forward and then you remember something, or worse, you're telling someone because you think it's normal. And then they're like, ooh, sister, that's not normal. And then you realize, in fact, it was harmful. Anyway, so yeah, any insight on those of us that kind of experience that from time to time?
Yeah. My first recommendation would be, can you talk to yourself about that like a friend would? Can you meet yourself there with some understanding and compassion? Because if a friend was telling you that, you'd be like, oh, honey, you didn't know any better. And I understand. Yeah, that was awful. And I forgive you. Right. And it's really hard to do that for ourselves. And that takes work. So sometimes it's helpful to really actually think about a friend doing that. Right. Or another part of you that could be like a friend saying that to yourself. And then eventually it can get a little bit easier to give that compassion to yourself naturally. Or even could you if Jesus or God are very important to you or whatever that figure is, could you imagine receiving that from, right? God saying, I forgive you. You did the best you could, right? And there's still chances for like anything that you regret to make restitution for, right? Or to write out apology letters, whether you see the person or not, right? That you know that you're addressing that in your life. And there might be ones you have to need to write to yourself or just acknowledging like, that was so embarrassing and I had no idea. Like, just can I be like, okay, that's human life. And can I meet myself there and be like, okay, I'm human. And I have compassion for that and incorporate that into who I was then. So part of my framework for healing is actually also reclaiming the parts of us that were like so die hard into this way of being because they were trying so hard to help us. They helped us survive that time in our lives and maybe even thrive, right? And we don't need them around in the same way anymore, but they're really valuable parts of us that we can say, thank you so much for all that work you did. And what would it be like to be present in my inner world in a way that was a little bit different, a little bit more freeing?
That is so beautiful. That is the most beautiful thing I think I've ever heard. I love that. What about, talk to me about spousal relationships, because in situations where, in many religious frameworks, the man is the head of the house. And so if the woman is trying to untangle herself from these harmful expectations of gender roles and, submitting to the man, it could be a real rift in a relationship because it dethrones the man from this powerful position of having the final say, never having to explain himself, et cetera, et cetera. How have you helped your clients navigate that?
So I have a few thoughts about that. One is actually, it can be really unsettling to the man in some ways, but also it could be a relief because a lot of men I know didn't actually want all that pressure. It was a lot of pressure to be like the voice of God.
Oh, interesting.
So I think some men are going to be a lot more open to that than others. And so just understanding that there may be some like variation there. And then a second thing I would say is if anyone that's open to couples counseling, do couples counseling because that is a place to safely navigate that. And it needs to be someone who's not a biblical counselor because they may tell you the patriarchal line, right? Just make it better for your husband, which is not helpful for the relationship, really. So I just, be aware, be cautious about that. And then navigate and see what is okay and what works and what's not. I think we're always having to navigate how do we take care of ourselves and what we need? And then how do we be considerate of the people around us without emotionally caretaking or people pleasing? So, the spouse that's shifting, it sounds like in this scenario, it's the woman, right? Can she notice internally if she starts feeling really anxious about something or if she feels, nope, this is too far with my boundaries or accommodating? Can she say that and let her husband be able to feel the emotional weight of that himself and not have to make it for him? And that might cause some tension, but that is part of what's going to interrupt this cycle and how you're going to see, can we make this work? Or is this impossible at some point, right? Is he willing to work with me on this and adjust?
It's so impressive when you meet couples. I'm thinking of a particular one that they were like actually in a cult and moved away from that. And it's just so impressive. And they come out the other side just so much stronger, And I wonder if there are situations where the one spouse, probably the woman, is like feeling all this complicated emotion and pressure and just like inner turmoil, and she doesn't want to burden her husband with it, so she doesn't say anything. And then he is feeling this pressure to be all these things that a husband and a man is supposed to be. I never thought of that, probably because I'm not a man. but yeah, that's really sad. And they move through life never, being honest with each other about these feelings because they don't want to let the other down. They don't want to let their community down. They don't want to let God down. I guess there's real power in honesty. Okay, so let's recap. So the first thing that you said was expansion, and then curiosity, and then interoception. What was after that?
I have ADHD too.
Oh no, who's in charge of us? Oh, I think you talked about noticing self-talk and just like talking to yourself as though you were, you sat down with the spiritual figure that was important to you, whether that's Jesus or God or Buddha or whoever, and how would they address your hurt and your pain and have that compassion directed towards yourself instead of you carrying the burden of compassion always towards others, which I thought that was so good. Are there any other, what you might categorize as pragmatic or practical tips for people who are beginning this journey? Should they journal? Is there a particular book that is very helpful to kind of unlock these things? Because it can be daunting, even though you listed so perfectly at the very beginning examples of how this could be impacting our lives. It can be daunting to start to go through it, right? Are there any other practical recommendations that you would point people to?
Sure. I think it depends on where you are in the journey. There
Yeah.
are tons of resources out there, thankfully. So I have a course that's learning to trust yourself again, and also one about recognizing the covert narcissistic influences, just to help you understand the pain you're in and find safer places. There are a lot of people. So Brian McLaren is one that is in Christianity, Richard Rohr, and some others. All the Rachel Held Evans books, Caitlin Curtis, people that are navigating staying in Christianity and having a different way. There's also the Evolving Faith community that's excellent online. There are tons of other communities too, but that's one I can think of at the beginning that they're still very much Christian and they're just expanding, right? Evolving and finding safe places to do that. The new evangelicals also were really good. They're still very much evangelical for anyone that like that really fits, but they're doing it differently. And can we get rid of some of these power and control things, especially that we've seen since the Trump era of things that were incongruent with their faith? Some of my favorite books were You Are Your Own by Jamie Lee Finch, The Wisdom of Your Body by Hilary McBride, The Dance of the Dissident Daughter by Sumant Kidd. Those are some that crossed my mind that those were some of my favorites.
Those are great. That's a
and
lot
those
of
are maybe-
resources.
Yeah, I can give you tons. I have a whole page on my website. It's just resources, or just contact me and tell me where you're at. I can point you in the right direction.
That's really helpful.
I'm starting with James Bryan Smith of just like, I feel that God is in a swivel chair, right? Anytime I do something bad, he turns. And that's kind of where I started. I think that's kind of a really helpful place to start if you're just exploring. And I'm going to blank on the person's name, but I could find it later. That are some of those just kind of early shifts of more noticing and awareness.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of power in noticing. And I think it's so interesting that you said to observe what's going on within you with curiosity and not judgment. So for those of you listening and watching, and that's my podcast tagline, I promise I did not tell Catherine to say that. It just is a really happy coincidence. As we wrap up, can you...
Why not? We have that similar.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, there's so much power in curiosity, and it is powerful as a change agent. It's powerful as a connecting tool. It's powerful as a healing modality. So it's not something that is an accessory. I think it's a core feature that we're losing as a society, and it's hurting our relationships with each other. But as you pointed out, it's hurting our relationships with ourselves as well. Before we wrap, I want you to share about the nonprofit that you are beginning to work with on about creating healthy spiritual communities.
Yeah, it's called the Order of St. Hildegard. And if you look at the website, just Google the name, it's incredible. It's a spiritual healing space and also learning space for a wide range of spiritualities. So right now they're doing a cohort that's basically like a mini seminary degree or like the chaplaincy program that all pastors go through for development so that they can be spiritual leaders in all sorts of spiritual capacities that don't have to be just a certain brand of Christianity, but are somewhat Christian informed and also syncretized with whatever is speaking to them as far as the divine. And there's a membership that's going to be kind of an online space that's going to be coming up
And what's the purpose of the organization?
To help people find this expansive spirituality and find a place, because often after people do the deconstruction or even deconversion, there's a sense of like, where do I go? You're really missing this community and church and spiritual space. And so this is trying to create kind of healing
I love that.
heat in the spiritual space. Yeah. Anti-oppressive spiritual space.
An anti-oppressive spiritual space. That's definitely needed. Where can people stay in touch with you and learn more about some of your programs and what you have going on?
My website is bqcounseling.com for my initials, C and Q. And that has like everything. It has my courses, it has how to contact me, it has all my like great freebies. I have quizzes and different things to kind of get you started. And then I also have one-on-one coaching and counseling and group coaching as well. And I have a mailing list that I send out like really great information every week about these things like interoception and introspection and what's the difference and how can we be curious.
That's great.
Yes.
Thank you so much for taking time. This was amazing.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks, Meredith.
Thanks for listening. If you loved a couple episodes of the show, help me let others know by leaving a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. Just share what you're listening from and why you liked the certain episode. And if you did like this episode, you'll also like the one with former purity culture leader Joshua Harris asking if we should really save sex for marriage. That's episode 156. Stay tuned next week when I talk with author and journalist Maya Solovitz about why and how the teen rehab industry continues to thrive despite the bad press. Until then, keep it curious.